Hey, can I let you in on a secret? Some of your favorite single malt Scotch whiskey distilleries are bottled under code names. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiskey on the West Coast. My name is Matt, and today we are talking about the secret names of Scotch whiskey. Yes, some of your favorite whiskeys may be bottled under secret code names or trade names that don't actually tell you exactly what distillery made them. Have you ever been in a whiskey shop and seen a bottle on the shelf and say, hey, I don't recognize that name. That's not something I'm familiar with. And you do a Google search, and it's not the name of an active distillery or a distillery at all. Well, that's what I'm talking about here. And that might be because it isn't the name of a distillery, or maybe that distillery no longer exists. This is because Scotch distilleries sometimes will not allow their whiskey to be bottled under the distillery's name. Why? Because they want to protect the brand identity of the distillery when being bottled by someone else, like an independent bottler. Now, some of these secret or trade names are historic names of long-lost distilleries or places with local ties. Others are local landmarks, former distillery managers, and some are even thinly veiled insider whiskey jokes. But I want to talk to you about some of my favorites because there are dozens, but these are some of the ones you most commonly will find and possibly even on a shelf near you. Let's talk about the names. Before we get going here, guys, I love the comments that I get from you, and I thought it might be really fun in the comment section below to actually turn this into a bit of a game. So let me know in the comments down below how many of these you actually already knew. Especially let me know if you got a perfect score. I'm really excited to see how many of you may have actually gotten a perfect score and knew each and every one of these before I even said them. This will be a lot of fun. Also, guys, I have a new Patreon membership page. Thank you so much to my current patrons. I have a new Patreon exclusive review of a Benromach Polish Oak single cask coming out hopefully this weekend, just after this video drops. So I'm really excited about that. So if you want to support the channel in some other way, think about checking out the link in the description of this video to check out my Patreon page. All right, actually to the list, let's go. First up is one of my favorites, and that would be Williamson. I've got a bottle of Williamson right here. We'll put some pictures up so you can see a closer look at the labels. But Williamson, if you're not already familiar, which I'm gonna guess most of you know this one, Williamson is actually typically teaspooned Laphroaig. Yes, independently bottled Laphroaig, which, I mean, I'm all in for. I love Laphroaig, independent bottled Laphroaig. Oftentimes even better. So why I say oftentimes teaspooned is that it is not always teaspooned Laphroaig. And so we should talk about what teaspooning is. And so teaspooning is theoretically when a teaspoon of some other single malt Scotch whiskey has been added to the content of a cask, which would make it no longer a single malt from that distillery. And this was done again to protect brands so you couldn't put the name on a label. However, there's a lot of debate on whether or not teaspooning actually physically, literally occurs, or if it's just more of a theoretical thing. In any event, why I say oftentimes teaspoon Laphroaig? Well, this one actually says on the back label, single malt Scotch whiskey, which means this one was never actually teaspooned. They couldn't say that if it had been. So this one, Ardmore, great independent bottler. I love what they do. And they bottle some great stuff. This one's at 47.5%, so just a bit reduced. Why is it named Williamson though? Well, this is named after Bessie Williamson, the first woman to manage a Scotch whiskey distillery in the 20th century. And she was quite the person. There's a lot of different videos and articles you can read online. Really fascinating person. Not only was she the distillery manager, but she also became the owner of Laphroaig and really went on to broaden Laphroaig's appeal as a single malt and also expanding its popularity across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. She even managed the distillery during a really tough time during the Second World War. So I think it's really cool that we have Bessie Williamson's name on the front of many of these independently bottled Laphroaigs. So if you see the name Williamson on the label, it was made at the Laphroaig distillery on Islay. Other commonly seen secret or trade names of Laphroaig are usually more like inside jokes, like leapfrog, because it sounds kind of like Laphroaig. or Laughing Frog, same sort of thing. But what I see most commonly is Williamson. Whitlaw. What whiskey would be bottled under the name Whitlaw? Well, Whitlaw is a trade name for teaspooned Highland Park. Yeah, that's right, Highland Park, that Arcadian legendary distillery that's emblazoned with all sorts of Viking iconography now on their bottlings. Whitlaw is the name for teaspooned Highland Park that's oftentimes sold by independent bottlers. Now, why is it named Whitlaw? Well, it's named Whitlaw after the Whitlaw Hills on Orkney, which the distillery is located nearby. So that's where the name is derived from for Whitlaw. Now, Whitlaw isn't the only name that you will see Highland Park bottled under. There are many other names that are attributed to independently bottled Highland Park. Some of these are named after local landmarks like Stones of Stennis or Scarra Brae on Orkney. But others, 99% of, say, Secret Orkney, or here's an example of Orkney Islands, Unnamed Orkney, or how about another one here, Cask Orkney. 99% of these are independently bottled Highland Park. And why do I say that? Well, there is a chance that it is actually independently bottled Scapa. However, Scapa no longer sells casks to independent bottlers these days. The only one that I know that regularly bottles Scapa would be Gordon and MacPhail. And a long time ago, you'd see Scapa bottlings from, say, Old Malt Cask from Douglas Lang. However, again, very, very rare. So 99% of the time, these Orkney Islands, Secret Orkney, they're Highland Park. But there is that slight chance that they are Scapa. Look for peat on the label, look for other clues on the label. But when it comes to Whitlaw, Whitlaw is 100% Highland Park teaspoon malt. Westport. What could Westport whiskey be? Well, Westport whiskey is a teaspooned trade name for a malt, and it's one that's associated with exceptionally tall stills, oftentimes likened to the height of a giraffe. That's a big hint, but if you didn't pick up on the hint, that's okay, because I'm going to tell you that Westport is actually teaspooned Glenmorangie. It's Glenmorangie that's been teaspooned with whiskey from Glen Moray, which is a really interesting. That's really incredible opportunity to be able to see what Glenmorangie is like when it's actually bottled by someone else, because oftentimes it really seems to be proofed down quite a bit. I think it'd be really cool to try a Westport. I haven't tried one yet, but I have seen a couple on shelves, and it's actually a great opportunity to see what a giraffe whiskey is like with different spots on. So I think it's really cool. Why is it called Westport though? I couldn't find a confirmed answer, but if you look at the location of the distillery and where it is on the east coast of Scotland in the Highlands, it is actually located on basically the western portion of what's known as the Dornoch Firth. So perhaps that's why it's called Westport. It's by the ocean in the western part of the Dornoch Firth. That's what I've got. If you actually know the reason, let me know in the comments, because I could not find a very 100% tight answer to that. Stoisha is one of my favorite names from this list, and it's also one of my favorite types of whiskey from this list. Now, Stoisha, if you're not aware, is actually the independently bottled version of a type of whiskey from an Islay distillery that goes by the name Moyna. And Moyna, pronunciations, they're tricky. It means in Gaelic peat or moss. And so I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here. Stoisha is independently bottled, heavily peated Bunnahabhain from the north coast of Islay. Yeah, that's right. So some of my favorite Bunnahabhains from the distillery itself, from the official bottlings, are Moyna's bottlings. So heavily peated Bunnahabhains. And they're typically peated around 35 phenol parts per million. But when it's sold by independent bottlers, it is often under this name, Stoisha. Why is it called Stoisha? Well, actually, it's named after a lake on Islay, or I suppose I should call it a loch. Loch Stoisha is on the north part of Islay. It's actually located closer to Ardmore distillery on Islay these days than it is Bunnahabhain, but it is right in that area. So that's where the name is derived, is from Loch Stoisha. Now, one quick tip is sometimes independent bottlers don't actually change the name of Bunnahabhain to Stoa for their bottlings. One example is I have actually purchased Cadenhead's bottlings of heavily peated Bunnahabhain that are just labeled Bunnahabhain. You wouldn't know outside of the tasting notes that it's a Stoa. So be a little careful, but if you see Stoa, it's heavily peated Bunnahabhain. Have you guys ever seen a Blairfindy on the shelf near you? I've only ever seen one, and it was terribly expensive, but I was kind of attempting to pick it up because I knew exactly what it was. Do you guys know what it is? If you get a perfect score by the end of this video, I'll know that you definitely knew this one. But Blairfindy is actually teaspooned Glenfarclas whiskey from the Glenfarclas distillery. And Glenfarclas is one of the few family-owned distilleries in Scotland and a massive success story, but they're fiercely protective of their brand, and you'll rarely see an independently bottled Glenfarclas actually labeled Glenfarclas. They're very protective of that distillery name. And often, as much as you'll get is just like a Speyside, and then rumors will swirl that this a Speyside is from a legendary distillery that calls its whiskey a Highland malt, even though the distillery is located in the Speyside, really just a very short distance from the River Spey. So why is it called Blairfindy? Well, the name Blairfindy is labeled to this Glenfarclas independently bottled teaspoon whiskey because the Grants, the owners, the family that owns Glenfarclas, originally came from a farm called Blairfindy Farm. They were referred to as the Blairfindy Grants, hence the connection with Glenfarclas Distillery and the owners of it, the Grant family. So if you see Blairfindy on the shelf and you love Glenfarclas, it's probably a whiskey you want to think about picking up. Ever heard of Rubid Moore or Rubid Moore? I'm really uncertain as to pronunciation because I haven't heard many people actually say this name, but you'll see the spelling on the screen. But Rubid Moore is actually peated Highland whiskey from a particular distillery. Okay, I'll stop teasing it. I'll stop teasing. I'll just tell you that Rubid Moore is peated Glenturret, which is really cool because Glenturret's arguably Scotland's oldest working distillery, being officially founded in, I think, like 1775, just before Bowmore. However, Rubid Moore was first made in 2009 as the peated component for the owners at that time, Edrington, to put in their Black Grouse blended Scotch. Now, allegedly, this is named after a local large red house which was submerged when a new dam was constructed in the area. And a few interpretations of what Rubid Moore actually means in Gaelic is like big red, red warden, red supervisor, red major, these sorts of things. But the big thing to know about this is heavily peated Glenturret. Now, when they release it in their official bottling range, they actually cut it. They either cut it with unpeated distillate, so they'll vat the casks of peated and unpeated Glenturret, or they cut the barley beforehand. I'm not quite sure which it is, but what I know is when they actually make the Rubid Moore whiskey, the barley that they use has actually been smoked by peat smoke for about 3 days with a phenol count of 80 to 100 phenol parts per million. That is heavily peated whiskey. That is incredibly heavily peated for a Highland whiskey. So when you see independently bottled Rubid Moore, again, uncertain, that is heavily peated, independently bottled Glenturret. Ardlair is the unpeated distillate of a particular Highland distillery that oftentimes is referred to as Ardless because it's the distillate with the peat removed. So it's typically known as a peated whiskey, but it's unpeated when it's named Ardlair. And that distillery is Ardmore. Yes, Ardlair or Ardless, that is unpeated Ardmore whiskey. Now, I've only had the pleasure to try it once, but indeed it is from the Ardmore distillery, owned by Beam Suntory, which does make the unpeated distillate because they use it to blend in with the peated to make whiskeys like the core range Ardmore Legacy bottling. But when it's sold by independent bottlers, it is under the name Ardlair. Ardless is kind of an inside joke within the distillery, as my understanding, and by extension, with whiskey geeks like myself, because it's just a funny way of saying that it's Ardmore, but with a little less, without the peat. Additionally, you can find independently bottled Ardmores under the name Ardmore, but spelled AIRDMHOR. It's just a fun way to say it without actually saying it, because phonetically you're gonna say that as Ardmore. But yeah, Ardlair, unpeated, Ardmore. Do you know what Glenmorangie is? I only know what Glenmorangie is because I've had a Glenmorangie whiskey, and that's when I discovered where Glenmorangie comes from. Now, the name Glenmorangie, I believe, refers to the burn of Mossett, which is a tributary of the River Findhorn, and that tributary feeds a pond, which in 1900 was created to become the supply for the cooling water for a particular Speyside distillery. And that distillery is Benromach Distillery. Yes, Glenmorangie is teaspooned Benromach. Teaspooned with what? I'm not sure. Is it actually teaspooned? Kind of doubtful. I'm guessing they just say it's teaspooned and move on. But I can't say for sure. But teaspooned Benromach is oftentimes given the moniker Glenmorangie. Now, again, I've had exactly one Glenmorangie, and honestly, it made me want to drink an official bottling of Benromach because I really liked the official bottlings more than this one. But the one I had was only 7 years old, so it could have gotten a whole lot better. But yeah, if you see a Glenmorangie, that's independently bottled, teaspoon, Benromach. I saved one of my favorite names on this list for last, and that is Candle Kitty, which sounds really funny, but it's a really humorous name, and we get that name from one of the most humorous people in whiskey, and that's from Angus McRailed, who's behind Whiskey Sponge and the Whiskey Sponge bottlings, as well as other things. But he has the moniker Candle Kitty for a particular famous Highland distillate. And so I'm going to give it away, but I'm going to bring out a bottle here, a bottle of Clynelish 14. If you look at the front of the bottle of Clynelish 14, you'll see at the top here, that is the Scottish wildcat, which is the symbol of Sutherland. And I believe it's in the Sutherland clan crest, but Sutherland is where Clynelish is located. The Scottish wildcat is a fairly emblematic symbol of that place and of those people. Still with me? Okay, so the reason why they're calling it Candle Kitty, though, one of the most distinctive and sought-after characteristics of Clynelish is kind of almost like a waxy palate, oftentimes compared to candle wax. Put these two things together, what do you have? You got Candle Kitty. So more common names for Clynelish would be something like Sutherland. But I've also seen other things like Kitnish, which again is really playing off this cat theme. But many seem to wind up in the wild as Highland single or blended malts, but they'll give you hints. And so Boutique Whiskey Company is one of these that will give you hints. They'll have like a picture of a cat in a cloud, just a cat cloud. And then they'll have a hot air balloon. I'm thinking of a Kensington Wine Market bottle, in particular, a hot air balloon that's being heated by a wax candle. And so, you got a kitty, got a candle, you got a Clynelish. So it's a really humorous and cheeky way to go about it. Distilleries, independent bottlers will oftentimes have these little cheeky ways to let you know what's in a bottle without actually saying what's in the bottle. But if you see a Candle Kitty, that's a Clynelish. There are so many other secret names for Scotch whiskey. You're probably thinking to yourself, I've left a lot off the table here. I haven't mentioned a ton. And that's because it's just gonna be too long of a video for me to cram them all into one video. So I have this first part of this video going out now. And if you want more of this sort of content, I'm gonna be releasing after this video, a second one called the Secret Names of Scotch Whiskey Extras. It's just some of the extra ones that I wanted to still bring to you because this is a really fun topic and I'm having a lot of fun talking about it to you guys. So thank you once again for watching this video. Continue liking, sharing, subscribing to the channel. Leave comments down below what score you got on this list, and let me know what you think I should be including in another video like this. Thank you to my patrons, my Patreon members. I really appreciate you supporting the channel in that way. Until next time, from the West Coast, I'll see you next time.